Hello, everyone. Joel Dietz here, and live from Miami, where we're doing some in-person, exclusive events for participants in the NFT ecosystem, exploring what's next in the world of NFTs, and particularly how some of the people in the fine art world are getting involved in NFTs, and looking at the dynamics around both markets and the evolution of technology. It's a really cool moment to be in the NFT market, not just because of the explosion of new types of art and financial value, but because people are creating all kinds of new things. So, a little bit back history, I got involved in cryptocurrency full time, basically when the Ethereum white paper came out, and I would say that had a nerdgasm. And this is kind of a little bit of a growth of what happened around what was ultimately called the ICO market, where Ethereum, was the first little entry and creating tokens and what you could do with tokens on a global distributed network. First year, 45 million. Then we had a second year, 300 million, the DAO, if anyone was involved in that. A year later, we had 9 billion, so many different projects created. And then all the way up to 28 billion, many different projects, huge explosion in the kind of level of interest, a lot of diversity, geographically distributed, and then a whole lot of projects as well that sort of disappeared and went to zero. So you can look at some of these names, but that's sort of the way that we've seen these cycles evolve. And it's a very exciting thing, but it's also something to be warning of, in that not every project survives. And in fact, EOS here is big highlighted. I don't know what their market cap is, but there's many projects that don't go all the way. So here's a little more about my own personal background. I was a programmer since I got a scholarship study at age 13. Won a bunch of awards. Like I said, started working Ethereum basically day one. Left everything I was doing. I started MetaMask, DevCon 0. Also did the first academic research on crypto economics. I'm now a fellow at MIT. Also worked in the think tank management consulting world for a little while, and have a lot of interest in academic research going on. But the latest project I have is called Artwallet, which is a kind of NFT smart wallet, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Interesting enough, in the Ethereum world, it hasn't always been super friendly to artists. I have been an academic researcher. Here's a couple books that I wrote recently, monographs on kind of holonics, and it was kind of interesting thing, early Ethereum that many people are interested in. I also was a yoga teacher for a long time and ran a community in California and also in Italy, where people kind of went together and did joint kind of meditation practice. Some of the early Ethereum people lived in this community and basically ran the office. Also done a lot of academic research on Burning Man and myths and the evolution of myths and art, which is kind of interesting in the context of some of these things, because how are myths born? How do they evolve? How does art play a role? Larry Harvey was a big fan of this golden triangle, which basically was talking about unmediated experience, where no one judges you for anything. You're able to experience it, and a kind of full expression. Has a Freudian element, has some other things to it. So that has been an evolution, and a lot of that kind of goes into some other things I'll talk about. I also have a few books of poetry that I've published, written. So been doing this for a couple of decades at this point, talking about the future, including of law and how it's evolved over not just the last 50 years or the last 5 years, even though I organized the first legal summits at Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, but looking at sort of the multiple millennia idea of law and how it interplays with things like religion and culture. So I'll talk a little bit more. And then here's the kind of other art. This is actually the first physical painting that I sold. It's a few AI generated art based on a photography that then is painted in real life and combines sort of the best of psychedelic art with motifs that are drawn from the human body and traditional forms, and then paired with poems that I've written. So that was, I've been doing artistic things for quite a long time, independent of NFTs. So this is going to be kind of an interesting thing, a perspective of sort of what's going to hold value and what isn't in this NFT space. So by the numbers, I just love these market overviews. looking at things. So DeFi itself, this is actually not the most recent numbers, but Ethereum, many billions in market cap now, but DeFi, TVL, the value lax, it's been about a third of the overall market cap. So it's creating a bunch of different financial instruments. MetaMask, like I said, project that I started, now 5 million sort of active users ish, coming up to near where Coinbase is. So, just tons of people adopting these things, and NFTs are actually of the overall DeFi market. I went in a lot of NFT events recently in Dubai, which led to some very successful sales, including by our own local Amrita Sethi, and then an agency where we represent a lot of top celebrities, including things like Albert Einstein's estate, where we're doing some very interesting things. So that's a very sort of exciting thing. But you can see, just looking for NFTs as well, that the art is actually even in big people like Whale Shark who are managing large portfolios, art is still a fraction even of the NFT things. So I'm going to talk a little bit kind of about why that might be the case, and a little bit maybe about the future. But Nick Szabo wrote this amazing essay. I think everyone involved with crypto should read it, and it goes basically in the history of currencies. And he mentions lots of different things have been used as currencies. It's called shelling out. And including seashells, and they're things that people thought were pretty, that were valuable, fungible, various type of characteristics. And then when he wrote the original Bitcoin gold thing, he said, what if we had a distribute where we could put different things? So, and gold would be obviously the first kind of implementation, but people have looked at all kinds of colored coins were done early on in the Bitcoin world. Then when Ethereum launched, we had virtual land, CryptoPunks, which kind of was the first to build like a dynamic trading, and then that was standardized with the ERC 721. Crypto kitties, and then more collectible market started. Probably with William Shatner was the first kind of big thing, but then obviously NBA Top Shots has been huge, and now we have this big art thing, which is really interesting because is the value of it over time. So this is the very first phrase by Nick Szabo when he suggested this model. And he just says, what if we could have these costly bits created online and with minimal dependence on trusted third parties, a distributed property title registry. So it's kind of interesting because it is a broader concept, even from the very beginning, than just a digital gold equivalent, i.e. Bitcoin. So this is some other art projects that kind of go into the future of, I think, where some of these things are going. But this was launched very early in the Steam store as the first virtual reality app. I kind of started this project as well. And kind of cool looking at dynamic fractal emergences and VR, and going through no real crypto back into this, but the evolving metaverses and virtual universes that can exist there. And then very clearly from the very beginning, I personally was looking at how does a digital asset registry look like. So maybe people are now involved in crypto voxels and Decentraland and other things like that. But one of the cool things about a metaverse as well is that it can be dynamically evolving. It can involve AI, it can involve math, and it can be totally immersive. And we're just really scratching the surface of where this can go. As well as here to go back to the Burning Man thing, I created a Burning Man camp. These are actually some hats that I designed. If you're around Miami, you may actually get to see one of these, limited edition hats because there's only 12 of them. But I also bring this pyramid to Burning Man. It's a little one here. It projects on this big pyramid, but has cool like light things. And if you look at the nature of these projections, and if you can look online, you can find all kinds of cool videos. But basically, there's a huge arts community that makes art, and this is not just the physical pieces. Obviously, these pyramids are mostly made of steel, but then all the things that you can create that would go through the projection. And within the burning community, which is like based around a gift economy and stuff like that, maybe the people are tech workers, this is like their hobby, but it's a very interesting dynamic and subculture that exists that is basically neglected by the fine art world. Like the big fine art dealers, they don't deal in any of this kind of dynamic digital art. So that just lends itself to the cryptocurrency world. And there's another kind of cool project that I'm working on right now. It's called 128 bits. Basically, a bit is like a pixel, and we have a potential collaboration with Mr. Brainwash who's going to do this. But basically, it's a dynamic, evolving art piece where you auction up a bunch of different pixels, and then each person can change what the actual pixel is through a smart contract. So once you own it, you're actually able to participate it, and it changes the physical final piece. So I think no one's done this. This is he's amazing person, art director for Assassin's Guild. He's doing some pieces on Super Rare right now. But looking at kind of taking these dynamic things, if you know anything again about the history of fine art, just kind of project. But there's this amazing architect Schinkel who did stage design, designed many of the most iconic buildings of Berlin, and that they could never built, in real life, even in the history of architecture. So these virtual worlds are kind of emerging to allow people to build things at a scope and scale that people have neglected or were just hard for the matter of scope. This is another interesting project called Voxelverse that I just came up with. And this is basically on my works. I have these things, but basically dynamic evolving voxel world. But instead of having like one set of scale, basically there's scale factors so that you can each scale factor, you can go one level deeper and then create something at that thing, as well as being able to zoom and have an electric sheet model. So I don't know if people know too much about electric sheep, but I would recommend looking it up because it was a dynamic addition through basically algorithmically generated art. But then there was a participatory, crowd-driven nature of what could be added. So these are all just to show that I think we're at the very beginning of this huge explosion of NFTs. It may seem like a lot now, but going back to the stuff in the beginning. And a little while ago, I went through a list of all the different functionality that you need to do the heavy lifting around NFTs, and it involves, different types of assets and digital rights and streaming things, and obviously the ecological element, and various type of things, like the future of real business models, like the kind of streaming content and things like that that artists are using doing, especially musical artists. So we started a project called Artwallet. It's now been around for about a month, but we announced it 2 weeks ago. Within a week, we were 4x oversubscribed for our, very small round just to build out the product. So, but basically, it involves exclusive NFT content, so where you can see the audio-visual streaming. Amazing team with Hacken that is basically building that. So, and we have, a lot of basically celebrities and people who have already kind of agreed to use this. And particularly looking at, how to solve some of the big problems. Obviously everyone's aware now that you kind of have to be cross-chain. I personally, didn't have all of the things within the art world. The early Ethereum world was not always that friendly to artists. I mean, to be perfectly frank, I actually had to lend money to the Ethereum Foundation a couple of different times that I was never paid back for because they stopped paying their employees somewhere in 2015. And I've sort of asked them multiple times, but it's a little bit weird when the foundation asks you basically to pay for things and then doesn't pay you back. So that was a bit of a disappointing thing, but now this is a much larger dynamic experience, I guess, for people who are participating. There's many different chains. It's not all just Ethereum anymore. And then, you have the ecological impact, which people have talked about quite a bit. But I think from some of the main fine artists that we are dealing with, it's a really big part of their brand to be at the future and forefront of sustainability and doing new things. So that is just an amazing kind of thing to be part of. And as well as just this content locking. I mean, there's sort of a longer conversation about DRMs and how that technology has been implemented badly in the past, but it's also a way of allowing artists to directly monetize their content and then the rewarding. So people have looked at the kind of automated downstream royalty streams, and that's a problem that has been implemented in many different marketplaces, but still there's not an industry standard for. And I think we're in a good position to really build in some of the key marquee artists and say, hey, look, you can basically buy this content, you can sell it to your fans can resell it or rent it to other people. And as long as that process is continuing, then basically the original creator of that content can be the first person through kind of dynamic royalties to be paid back, rather than, as often happens in the entertainment industry, the last person. So to get paid back. And there's many instances where the artist, things make millions and millions of dollars for the label, but the artist gets, nothing. So we're kind of hopefully going to solve the problem. I promise I'll also talk a little bit about value appreciation within things. So, and these are just some things to keep in mind. I think it's really important before you buy NFTs to think about it, because a lot of people are basically selling NFTs based on hype. And a lot of times people buy into the hype, they get things that aren't going to hold value. So looking historically at some of these things, world, some of it really helps if there's a corresponding recognized market value. So if you're buying real estate, whatever it is, that thing is still going to hold value. If you're buying, a physical art piece that is an antiquity that's been around for hundreds of years, and that's going to hold value. First in class, this is one of the cool things, and definitely one of my favorite things about the Ethereum, et cetera, world, is that people are really valuing stuff based on doing the first thing of a particular technological type. So CryptoPunks, hash masks, CryptoKitties are all really in this category. No one had ever done anything like this before. Some of these have swag status. Obviously, like there's only so many punks. So you can basically, whatever, put it on your clubhouse thing and be like, look, I'm a punk. Kind of like a digital Lambo, if you will. Artistic merit, I think that's still something that's a little underdeveloped, but kind of an interesting thing, because the fine art markets, as they're evolving around NFTs, are often pulling from artists that were neglected in the traditional fine art market, including some of the Burning Man stuff that I mentioned. So that's very exciting. Enforce another very, very fascinating thing, but that's core to all of these, property ledgers. Kind of other game dynamics. So whether it's the digital real estate stuff or other adoption curves, I think kind of figuring out what actual real adoption is around these things is very important. There's a lot of research to be done. In fact, we're hiring for a research assistant right now. So if that's interested, please reach out to me, because we're building kind of the data side of some of these user adoption curves around different kind of NFT dynamics. And then gas. Obviously, this is not really an NFT, but the platforms that facilitate these things are the ones that are going to continue to appreciate in value. So yeah, we have a position in many different things already, through the kind of syndicate that I started. I can't actually talk about all of these projects, but we basically have participated in building communities around NFTs, as well as holding on to many different aspects of them. And then I also am teaching a more general DeFi mastery course, because we're looking basically to help people onboard, traditional investors, banks, how they participate in the DeFi space, because there's so many, advantages to doing these things in kind of a fully decentralized way. There's those opportunities around kind of new types of financial instruments coming out of these NFT markets. So what's next? I mean, I think really it's up to you. Each one of you is a creator in some ways, just by being interested in this. I think it's important to keep in mind the things that are sort of long-term value creation. Obviously, when sort of I started MetaMask many ages ago, I'd already built a browser extensions before, and it was obvious to me that that was an entry point, into a much larger audience, the people who use web browsers, as to opposed to the people who would download a new client that was built by the Ethereum Foundation. And with Artwallet and other things, we're looking at the very similar dynamic: is how do we take these celebrities, people who have, 10 million followers, 100 million followers, and allow them to have a seamless experience where they're basically experienced, but not necessarily needing to understand NFTs. So I think that's a very exciting thing to be part of, is really that process. And it's partially an educational process, but one of the best ways of educating people is to almost make it so they don't have to understand anything new. And then the other one that I'm very excited as well is the infrastructure behind DeFi, because there's so many different types of financial instruments, and I've sort of just barely touched the surface of that, as well as figuring out, and I've been talking to a lot of people from the more traditional fine art world, how do you actually have art pieces that experience long-term appreciation, which is maybe different from what you get in like a Beeple sale where it sells for a lot of money, but then, it's not necessarily going to retain the value for the people who are the collectors. And so there's a bit of a push and a pull over the people who are maybe accumulating and collecting on a kind of art historical long-term perspective, as well as a kind of short-term, more hypey kind of pump. So those are all things to keep in mind. And I hope to see many of you in Miami who are here. And I will say as well, it's a very interesting erotic NFT drops coming up for kind of seeing how the future of that industry will evolve through NFTs. So if you're interested in an invite to any of the more sort of exclusive events that are happening, please reach out to me.